Emperor Vextar stood on the bridge of his massive throne ship and watched the stars burn. His yellow eyes glowed with satisfaction as another world fell under his control. The planet below him had once been home to a proud warrior race. Now, it was nothing but ash and broken cities. "Another victory for the Dominion, my Emperor," said General Torvak. Bowing his scaly head low, Vextar did not reply. He never celebrated victories anymore. After 3,000 years of ruling the galaxy, conquest had become as simple as breathing. His empire stretched across 7 star systems. Billions of beings called him master. None dared to challenge. His power, the Emperor, was nearly 10 feet tall, with dark green scales that seemed to absorb light. His species, the HFY, had evolved from ancient predators. They were born to hunt, to fight, and to rule. Vextar was the greatest of them. His throne room floated in the cold darkness of space, a crystal palace that caught starlight and turned it into power. The walls were made from the bones of defeated enemies. The floor was polished stone taken from conquered worlds. Everything about the place was designed to make visitors feel small and afraid. Vextar walked to his throne, a massive seat carved from a single asteroid. The chair was cold against his scales, but he liked the feeling. It reminded him that power was hard and unyielding, just like him. "Bring me the intelligence reports," he commanded. Prime Chancellor Keyclost approached, with a data crystal in his clawed hands. The old HFY was smaller than the Emperor, but his mind was sharp as a blade. He had served Vextar for 2 centuries and knew better than to waste his time. "3 new worlds have appeared on our border, my Emperor. Human colonies in the Outer Rim. They call themselves New Sol, Bazen Station, and Incheon Prime." Vextar's eyes narrowed. Humans were a young species, barely out of their home system. He had heard reports of them before, but had not considered them worth his attention. Young races usually destroyed themselves before they became a threat. "Show me," he said. The air above his throne filled with images. 3 worlds orbited distant stars, each one covered with cities and farms. Ships moved between them carrying goods and people. The colonies looked peaceful, almost innocent. "How many humans live on these worlds?" Vextar asked. "Approximately 50 million across all 3 colonies, my Emperor. They have been growing rapidly in the past 50 years. Vextar studied the images more carefully. The human ships were well designed, their cities were organized, and their technology looked advanced. Too advanced for such a young species. What is their military strength? They have defensive grids around each world and a small patrol fleet. Nothing that could threaten our forces, but their weapons are surprisingly sophisticated. Our analysts believe they could pose a problem if allowed to continue developing." The Emperor stood up from his throne. His massive form cast long shadows across the crystal floor. He had learned long ago that the best time to crush an enemy was before they became strong enough to fight back. "Humans," he said, tasting the word. "I remember stories about them. They are supposed to be emotional creatures, weak, sentimental." "Yes, my Emperor. Our intelligence suggests they form strong family bonds and avoid conflict when possible. They prefer negotiation to warfare." Vextar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Perfect, emotional species were always easy to control. They cared too much about their families, their homes, their feelings. Such weaknesses made them simple to defeat. "How long would it take to conquer all 3 worlds?" he asked. General Torvak stepped forward. "With our current fleet strength, we could have all 3 colonies under our control within 1 standard month, my Emperor. Their defenses are adequate but not sufficient to stop a coordinated assault. And the cost? Minimal. We would lose perhaps a dozen ships, no more than 1,000 soldiers. The humans would likely surrender quickly once they realized resistance was hopeless." Vextar walked to the great window that showed the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, 50 million humans lived their simple lives, completely unaware that their fate was being decided. They probably thought they were safe in their distant colonies, far from the great powers of the galaxy. They were wrong. "There is something else, my Emperor. Chancellor Kiklost said carefully. The human colonies are led by a former military commander named Kim Dae-ho. Our sources suggest he is intelligent and experienced. He may not surrender as quickly as other species have. It does not matter, Vexstar replied. All species break eventually. Some just take longer than others. The Emperor returned to his throne and sat down heavily. The decision was made. The human colonies would fall, just like every other world that had dared to exist without his permission. Their technology would be seized, their people enslaved, their world stripped of resources. Prepare the war fleets, he commanded. We launch the assault in 3 days. Should we attempt to contact them first, my Emperor? Offer them the chance to surrender without bloodshed? Vexstar considered this. He usually preferred quick conquests to long wars, but something about these humans annoyed him. Perhaps it was their distance from his empire, their apparent confidence in their safety. Or perhaps it was simply time to remind the galaxy what happened to those who forgot to fear. No, he said finally. Let them see our ships in their skies and know that their time of peace is over. When they realize they cannot win, they will beg for mercy. And then we will decide what that mercy costs. The bridge crew began preparing for war. Ships were called back from patrol duties, weapons were loaded, and invasion plans were finalized. Within hours, the greatest war machine in galactic history was turning toward 3 small human colonies that had no idea what was coming. Emperor Vexstar sat on his throne and watched his empire prepare for another conquest. Soon the humans would learn what every other species in the galaxy already knew. Resistance was futile. Surrender was inevitable. And Vexstar ruled everything under the stars. The only question was how much they would suffer before they accepted the truth. Governor Kim Dae-ho stood in the command center of New Sol Colony and watched his world prepare to die. The massive screens around him showed enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace like deadly rain. Hundreds of them, each one larger than anything in the human fleet. Sir, we're getting the same reports from Bizen Station and Incheon Prime, said Commander Park Min-soo, his voice tight with fear. The Dominion has sent fleets to all 3 colonies simultaneously. Kim nodded slowly. He had been a soldier for 40 years before becoming a governor. He knew what a coordinated attack looked like. This was not some random raid or border skirmish. This was conquest. How long do our defenses have? He asked. Our best estimate is 6 hours before they break through the planetary shields. Maybe 8 if we're lucky? 6 hours. Kim closed his eyes and thought about the families sleeping in their homes below. Children who would wake up to a world under alien rule. Parents who would watch their dreams die. Grandparents who had traveled across the galaxy to build a new life only to see it destroyed. Sir, Admiral Choi is requesting permission to engage the enemy fleet, Commander Park said. With what? Kim asked bitterly. We have 30 patrol ships against their hundreds of warships. It would be suicide. Admiral Choi says the fleet is willing to buy time for civilian evacuations. Kim looked at the tactical display. The human ships were small and fast, designed for patrol work and asteroid mining. They had never been built for war against a galactic empire. Sending them against the Dominion fleet would be like sending children to fight tigers. Tell the Admiral to hold position, Kim ordered. I will not waste lives on a gesture. The governor walked to the window and looked out at the city below. New Sol stretched to the horizon, its towers gleaming in the morning sun. 3 million people lived here, worked here, loved here. They had come from Earth to build something better, something peaceful. Now it was all about to end. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet, the communications officer announced. Put it through. The main screen flickered and showed a massive reptilian face. The creature's yellow eyes were cold and cruel. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding stone. I am General Torvak of the Dominion Empire. You will surrender. Your worlds immediately, or we will take them by force. You have 1 hour to decide. The transmission ended. Kim stared at the blank screen for a long moment. 1 hour to decide the fate of 50 million people. 1 hour to choose between hopeless Resistance and shameful surrender. Governor, what are your orders? Commander Park asked quietly. Before Kim could answer, the door to the command center burst open. His daughter Lee Nari rushed in, still wearing her laboratory clothes. As the colony's chief xenobiologist, she had been working through the night, studying the alien transmissions. Father, you cannot fight them, she said urgently. I've been analyzing their fleet composition and technology. They have weapons that could crack our planet like an egg. If you resist, everyone will die. And if we surrender, everyone becomes a slave, Kim replied. I've read the reports about Dominion conquest. They do not treat defeated enemies kindly, Nari grabbed her father's arm. But some survive, some live. If you fight, no one lives. Is pride worth 50 million lives? Kim looked into his daughter's eyes. She was brilliant, compassionate, and everything he had hoped to build in this new world. The thought of her in chains made his heart break, but the thought of her dead was even worse. Sir, Admiral Choi is reporting that the enemy has begun targeting our defense satellites, Commander Park announced, and they're not waiting for our answer. Kim watched as red dots began disappearing from the tactical display. Each one represented months of work, billions of credits, and years of hope. The Dominion was methodically dismantling their defenses, whether they surrendered or not. Father, please, Nari whispered. There has to be another way. Maybe we can negotiate, find some compromise. You don't negotiate with the Dominion, Kim said sadly. You submit or you die. Those are the only choices they give. But even as he spoke, an idea began forming in his mind. He had spent decades studying military history and diplomatic strategy. Every conflict had rules, even conquest. And sometimes those rules could be bent by someone clever enough to understand them. Nari, you've studied alien cultures. What do you know about Dominion? Diplomatic protocols? They don't really have any, she said. They typically demand complete surrender and impose their terms. But Father, there are historical examples of conquered species being granted limited autonomy if they proved useful enough. How useful? Very useful, and very quickly. Kim turned back to the tactical display. The enemy ships were now inside the orbital defense grid, systematically destroying anything that could pose a threat. Soon they would begin landing troops on the surface. Open a channel to the Dominion fleet, he ordered. Sir? Commander Park looked shocked. You heard me. And get me Admiral Choi and the governors of the other 2 colonies? If we're going to surrender, we do it properly. The main screen flickered to life again, showing General Torvas's cold reptilian features. The alien looked annoyed at being contacted. You wish to surrender? The general asked. I wish to discuss terms, Kim replied carefully. There are no terms. You surrender unconditionally or your cities burn. And then let them burn, Kim said, putting iron in his voice. But know that you will inherit dead worlds and empty cities. We humans prefer death to slavery. It was a bluff and a dangerous one. Kim was betting that the Dominion preferred living slaves to dead martyrs. He was betting that conquest was more valuable than destruction. General Torvak's eyes narrowed. You would sacrifice your people for pride? I would sacrifice them for freedom. The question is whether your emperor prefers valuable colonies or radioactive wastelands. For several long seconds, the alien general said nothing. Kim could almost see the calculations running through his mind. Dead humans produce nothing. Living humans could be put to work. You will send representatives to negotiate the terms of your surrender, Torvak finally said. 1 ship, 3 representatives, no weapons. Any deception will result in the immediate destruction of your colonies. Agreed, Kim said quickly. The transmission ended. Kim slumped in his chair suddenly, feeling every one of his 60 years. He had bought time, perhaps days or weeks, but time for what? What could 3 human diplomats possibly say to an empire that had conquered the galaxy? Father, who will you send? Nari asked. Kim looked at his daughter, then at the burning defense. Grid on his screens, then back at Nari. Sometimes the most important decisions were also the most terrifying. I'll send our best, he said quietly, and pray that it's enough. The small human diplomatic ship looked like a toy next to the massive Dominion war vessels. Governor Kim Dae-ho sat in the passenger compartment and tried not to think about how easily any one of those ships could destroy them with a single shot. Beside him, veteran diplomat Park Jae-sung reviewed his notes one final time. Park had negotiated with hostile aliens before, but never with an empire that controlled half the galaxy. His weathered face showed no fear, but Kim could see the tension. In his shoulders, on Kim's other side, his daughter Nare stared out the small window at the enemy fleet. She had insisted on coming as their cultural advisor, arguing that her knowledge of alien psychology might help. Kim had tried to refuse, but Nare was as stubborn as her mother had been. "Remember," Park said quietly, "we are not here to win. We are here to lose as little as possible." "What's the difference?" Nare asked. "Winners get to write the treaty. Losers get to hope the winners are feeling generous." Their ship shuddered as a tractor beam grabbed it. Through the window, Kim watched the Emperor's throne ship grow larger and larger until it filled their entire view. The crystal palace floated in space like a deadly jewel, crackling with captured starlight. "Landing bay ahead," announced their pilot, Captain Lee Dong-wook. "Sensors show about 100 armed guards waiting for us." "Only 100?" Park said dryly. "I'm almost insulted." The ship touched down in a vast hangar filled with military vehicles and weapon racks. As soon as the engines stopped, alien soldiers surrounded them. The guards were tall and heavily armed, with scales that gleamed like armor under the harsh lights. "Humans, exit your vessel," commanded one of the guards in broken standard. "You will be searched for weapons." Kim, Park, and Nari stepped out of their ship with their hands visible and empty. The security scan was thorough and humiliating, but they endured it in silence. When it was finished, they were escorted through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. The walls were covered with trophies from conquered worlds. Broken weapons, torn flags, and what looked like the preserved heads of defeated enemies. Nari kept her eyes straight ahead, but Kim could see her hands shaking slightly. "Breathe," he whispered to her. "They want us to be afraid." "I am afraid," she whispered back. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." They walked for what felt like hours through the enormous ship. Guards watched them from every corner. Automated weapons tracked their movement. The message was clear: you are completely at our mercy. Finally, they reached the throne room doors. Two massive barriers made of black metal and glowing crystal. The guards stopped and spoke into their communicators in their own language. After a moment, the doors began to open with a sound like thunder. The throne room was vast beyond imagination. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them. The walls curved away into the distance, covered with starlight that moved like living things. And in the center, on a throne carved from a single asteroid, sat the most terrifying being Kim had ever seen. Emperor Vextar was enormous, nearly twice the height of a human. His dark green scales seemed to absorb light, making him look like a shadow given form. His yellow eyes glowed with ancient hunger and infinite cruelty. When he looked at the human delegation, Kim felt like a mouse being studied by a snake. "So," the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "these are the humans who think they can negotiate with the Dominion." Kim stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Imperial Majesty, I am Governor Kim Dae-ho of New Seoul Colony. This is Diplomat Park Jae-sung and Cultural Advisor Lee Nari. We thank you for granting us this audience." "I did not grant you anything," Vextar replied coldly. "You are here because I allow it. You will leave when I permit it. And you will accept whatever terms I offer." The Emperor gestured, and a holographic document appeared in the air between them. Kim read the first few lines and felt his heart sink. The terms were even worse than he had feared. "Complete and unconditional surrender of all 3 colonies," Vextar began reading. "All military assets to be transferred to Dominion control. All technology and scientific data to be seized immediately. 90% of the human population to be relocated to labor camps on mining worlds," Nari gasped. Kim put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "The remaining 10% will serve as administrators and technicians under Dominion supervision," the Emperor continued. All children under 16 to be taken for education in Dominion facilities. All adults over 60 to be eliminated as non-productive. You're talking about murdering millions of people, Park said, his diplomatic training finally cracking, Vextar's eyes fixed on the old diplomat. I'm talking about efficient resource management. Your species will serve the Dominion or it will cease to exist. Those are your only options. Surely there must be some room for negotiation, Kim said carefully. Perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements that would benefit both our peoples. There is no negotiation. There is only submission. Park stepped forward, falling back. On decades of diplomatic experience. Your Majesty, if I may suggest, the Dominion might find our colonies more valuable if the population remains stable and productive. Forced relocations often result in decreased efficiency and increased resistance. Are you threatening me? Vextar asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Not at all, Your Majesty. I'm simply pointing out that happy workers are productive. Workers. Perhaps we could discuss terms that would ensure maximum benefit to the Dominion while maintaining social stability. The only stability I require is the stability of absolute obedience. Kim tried a different approach. Your Majesty, our colonies have developed advanced agricultural techniques that could feed millions throughout your empire. Surely that knowledge is worth preserving the scientists who created it. We will torture the information out of them if necessary. Every diplomatic strategy failed. Every appeal to logic or mutual benefit was dismissed. The Emperor had made his decision before they arrived. This was not a negotiation. It was a sentencing. Nari had remained silent through all of this, studying the Emperor with the careful attention of a scientist examining a new species. Kim could see her mind working, analyzing, searching for some weakness or opportunity. You have one local day to accept these terms, Vextar announced. Return to your colonies and prepare your people for transfer. Any attempt at resistance will result in the immediate destruction of all three worlds. The audience was clearly over. Guards moved forward to escort them back to their ship. But as they turned to leave, Nari suddenly spoke. Your Majesty, may I ask one question? Vextar's glowing eyes focused on her. Speak quickly, young human. Do you have children? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The entire throne room fell silent. Kim felt his blood turn to ice. What was his daughter doing? I had offspring once, the Emperor said slowly. They are grown now and command fleets of their own. Why do you ask? I was wondering if you remember what it felt like to hold them when they were small. For just a moment, something flickered across the Emperor's ancient face. Then his expression hardened again. Remove them, he commanded as the guards escorted them away. Kim wondered if his daughter had just saved them all or doomed them forever. Back in their small ship, Governor Kim Dae-ho stared at his daughter in disbelief. The guards had escorted them to a holding area where they would wait until the Emperor summoned them again. They had perhaps 6 hours before they would be forced to accept the terrible treaty. What were you thinking? Kim demanded, asking him about children. You could have gotten us all killed. Nari sat quietly in her chair, still thinking about what she had seen in the throne room. Father, did you notice his reaction when I mentioned holding children? I noticed he almost had us executed, Park Jae-sung said grimly. That was the most dangerous thing I've ever seen in 30 years of diplomacy. No, listen to me, Nari insisted. For just a second, his expression changed. Something human appeared in those alien eyes. Pain, maybe. Oh, longing. Kim shook his head. You're seeing things that aren't there. That creature has no human emotions. He's a predator who has spent 3,000 years conquering the galaxy. Every sentient species has some capacity for emotional connection, Nari argued. It's how they form societies in the first place. Even predators care for their young. And what exactly do you plan to do with this theory? Park asked. Nari was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at both men with tears in her eyes. I want to tell him about our children, really tell him. Not as a diplomatic strategy or a bargaining chip. Just as a parent talking to another. Parent, that's insane, Kim said. Showing weakness to a creature like that is suicide. Father, we're already going to die. All of us. 50 million people are going to become slaves or corpses because we can't offer him anything he wants more than conquest. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we try the one thing no one has ever tried with the Dominion Empire. Honesty. Real, emotional honesty. Park looked troubled. Nari, I understand your reasoning, but showing emotion to an enemy is the fastest way to lose everything. They use your feelings as weapons against you. What if we're wrong about that? Nari asked. What if the reason no one has ever successfully negotiated with the Dominion is because everyone tries to be as cold and logical as they are? Before either man could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Guards rushed into their holding area, their weapons drawn. The Emperor summons you. Now, one of them barked. They were marched back through the corridors even faster than before. Something had changed. The guards seemed nervous, constantly checking their communications devices. When they reached the throne room, Kim saw why. Emperor. Vextar was standing instead of sitting on his throne. His massive form paced back and forth like a caged animal. His advisors stood at a respectful distance, clearly afraid to approach him. You asked me about my children, the Emperor said without preamble as soon as they entered. Why? Nari stepped forward before her father could stop her. Because I have been studying the terms of your treaty, your majesty, and I realize that you're planning to take our children away from their parents. The young learn faster. They adapt better to new circumstances. Yes, but do you remember how it felt when your children were small? Do you remember wanting to protect them from everything that could hurt them? Vextar stopped pacing, his yellow eyes fixed on Nari with an intensity that made Kim's blood run cold. My offspring were raised in the traditional manner. Strength through struggle, independence through survival. But you loved them, Nari said softly, didn't you? The question hung in the air like a fragile thing. Kim could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. Park had gone completely still beside him. Love is weakness, the Emperor said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Is it? Nari asked. Or is love what makes strength worth having? And then, to Kim's absolute horror and amazement, his daughter began to cry. The tears started slowly, just a dampness in her eyes. But as she continued to speak, they began flowing freely down her cheeks. Your Majesty, in our colonies we have a little boy named Choi Minho. He's 5 years old, and he draws pictures of spaceships every day because he wants to explore the stars when he grows up. Under your treaty, he'll never see his parents again. The Emperor's advisors shifted nervously. No one had ever shown such vulnerability in the throne room before. We have an old man named Han Seok-jin who tells stories to the children about Earth, about the blue skies and green forests that most of them will never see. Under your treaty, he'll be killed because he's too old to work. Vextar's eyes were locked on Nari's tear-streaked face. Something was happening behind those alien features, some internal struggle that Kim couldn't understand. We have families who came across the galaxy together, who built homes and planted gardens and made plans for the future. Parents who sing their children to sleep and worry about their first days at school. Under your treaty, all of that ends. All of that dies. Stop, the Emperor commanded, but his voice was strangely quiet. Nari didn't stop. The tears were flowing freely now, and her voice broke with emotion. I know you think we're weak because we love each other, but that love is what made us brave enough to cross space and build new worlds. That love is what makes us willing to die rather than watch our children suffer. If that's weakness, then I'm proud to be weak. The throne room was completely silent, except for the sound of Nari's quiet sobbing. Even the guards had stopped moving. Everyone was staring at the impossible sight of a human crying in front of the most feared being in the galaxy. Emperor Vextar took a step toward Nari, then another. His massive form towered over her, but she didn't back away. She looked up at him through her tears and waited. In 3,000 years, the Emperor said slowly, no one has ever wept in my presence. I'm sorry if it offends you, Nari whispered. It does not offend me, Vexstar said, and his voice was unlike anything Kim had ever heard from him. It confuses me. The Emperor turned away from them and walked back to his throne, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he stood. Beside it, one clawed hand resting on the asteroid surface. Guards, leave us, he commanded suddenly. My Emperor? One of the advisors questioned. Everyone leave now. The throne room emptied quickly, leaving only the three humans and the most powerful being in the galaxy. Vexstar stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Tell me more about these children, he said finally. And Nari, still crying, began to speak. Emperor Vexstar sat alone in his private chambers, staring at the wall where the images of conquered worlds usually brought him satisfaction. Tonight they brought him nothing but questions. The human female's tears had shaken something loose. Inside him, something he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. For the first time in centuries, he was remembering things he had tried to forget, his own childhood on the prison world, where his people had been slaves, the day his father was taken away for speaking against their masters, the night his mother held him while bombs fell on their city, the tears in her eyes when she told him he had to be strong, had to survive, had to become something more than a victim. A soft chime announced that someone was requesting entry. Vexstar almost ignored it, but then he saw who it was. Prime Chancellor Kiklost, his oldest advisor and the closest thing to a friend he had left. Enter, Vexstar commanded. The old Kethmarai limped into the chamber, his scales gray with age. He had served 3 emperors before Vexstar and had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. My Emperor, the court is concerned about what happened in the throne room today, Kiklost said carefully. Let them be concerned? Showing mercy to these humans could be seen as weakness. There are already whispers among the fleet commanders. Vexstar turned to face his advisor. Do you think I am weak, old friend? I think you are troubled. I have not seen you like this since the early days of your reign. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke words he had never said aloud before. I remember my children. When they were young, Kiklost, before they became warriors and conquerors. I remember holding them and feeling something I told myself was just instinct. Just biological programming. My Emperor ... But it wasn't just instinct, was it? It was love. The same emotion I have spent 3,000 years crushing in others. Kiklost moved closer, his expression grave. My lord, love and weakness are often the same thing. You have built an empire by being stronger than love, harder than compassion. Have I? Or have I built an empire because I was afraid of being weak like my parents were? The question hung between them. Kiklost had known Vexstar since he was a young prince, angry and desperate to prove himself. He had watched him transform from a victim into a conqueror. The humans will interpret any mercy as an opportunity to rebel, Kiklost warned. Every species we have ever conquered will see this as a sign that you are losing your edge. Perhaps they would be right. My Emperor, you cannot undo 3,000 years of conquest with one moment of sentiment. Vexstar stood up and walked to the great window that showed the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, 50 million humans waited to learn their fate. Children who would never see their parents again. Families who would be torn apart forever. What if I don't want to undo it? Vexstar said slowly, what if I want to change it? Before Kiklost could respond, another chime announced another visitor. This time it was General Torvak, his expression grim. My Emperor, I must protest the delay in implementing the human surrender terms. Every hour we wait gives them more time to plan resistance. There will be no resistance, General. I have decided to alter the terms of surrender. Both aliens stared at him in shock. In the history of the Dominion Empire, no surrender terms had ever been changed once they were announced. My Emperor, that is unprecedented, Kiklost said. Then, perhaps it is time for precedent to change. Vexstar activated his personal communicator and sent a message to the human delegation. Within minutes, Kim Dae-ho, Park Jae-sung, and Nari were back in the throne room. The young woman's eyes were still red from crying, but she stood straight and faced him without fear. I have been considering your words, Vextar said. Tell me more about your colonies. Not the statistics or the resources? Tell me about the people. Nari looked surprised but began to speak. She told him about families who had left everything behind to build new lives among the stars. About scientists who worked not for conquest but for discovery. About artists who created beauty for its own sake. About children who played games and asked questions and dreamed of impossible things. As she spoke, Vextar found himself asking questions. What did human children learn in school? How did families choose their homes? What did people do when they were not working? The questions felt strange on his tongue, but he could not stop asking them. Hours passed. General Torvak and Chancellor Kiklost exchanged worried glances as their emperor engaged in the longest conversation with conquered subjects in recorded history. Finally, Vextar stood up from his throne and walked to the treaty document that still floated in the center of the room. This document is insufficient, he announced. My emperor? General Torvak asked. It treats thinking beings like resources to be harvested. It destroys value instead of creating it. It turns potential allies into desperate enemies. With a gesture, Vextar dismissed the holographic treaty. The document vanished, along with 3,000 years of Dominion policy. We will write a new agreement, he said. The humans stared at him in amazement. His own advisors looked like they were witnessing the end of the world. What kind of agreement? Kim asked carefully. One that acknowledges what you truly are. Not conquered subjects, but a species with value beyond simple labor. You will retain control of your colonies under Dominion protection. You will share your agricultural and scientific knowledge in exchange for access to our technology and trade networks. You're offering us an alliance? Park asked, hardly believing the words. I am offering you the chance to prove that cooperation is more valuable than conquest. General Torvak stepped forward. My emperor, this goes against every principle of Dominion expansion. The fleet commanders will never accept it. Then perhaps it is time for new principles, Vextar replied, and new commanders if necessary. He turned back to the humans. This will not be easy. There will be resistance from both our peoples. Some will see this as betrayal of everything we have built. But you're willing to try? Nari asked softly. Vextar looked at the young woman who had cried for her people in his throne room, who had shown him that strength could come from love. Instead of fear, I am willing to learn, he said. For the first time in 3 millennia, I am willing to try something new. The treaty they wrote that night was unlike anything in galactic history. It would change not just the fate of 3 human colonies, but the destiny of an entire empire. 1 year later, Ambassador Li Nari stood on the observation deck of the Emperor's throne ship and watched the sunrise over New Sol Colony. The sight never failed to amaze her. The same city that had once cowered under Dominion warships now thrived under their protection. The morning briefing is ready, Ambassador, said her assistant, Lieutenant Park So-young. The Emperor is waiting in the diplomatic chambers, Nari smiled. The title still felt strange after months of using it. She had become the first human. Ambassador to the Dominion throne ship, a position that had never existed before, and that many had thought impossible. She walked through corridors that had once terrified her. The trophy walls were still there, but now they shared space with gifts from allied worlds. Art, music crystals, and cultural artifacts that represented cooperation instead of conquest. Emperor. Vextar was waiting in a room that had been built specifically for diplomatic meetings. It was smaller than the throne room, with comfortable seating and windows that showed the stars instead of weapons displays. Good morning, Your Majesty, Nari said, bowing slightly. Good morning, Ambassador. Please sit, we have much to discuss. The morning briefings had become a routine that both of them valued. They would review the status of the human colonies, discuss integration challenges, and plan for the future. But more than that, they had become conversations between friends. The agricultural exchange program is exceeding all expectations, Nari reported. Human farming techniques have increased food production by 30% across 7 Dominion worlds. In return, our colonies now have access to Dominion medical technology that has eliminated most diseases. And the cultural exchange? More complicated but promising. We've had our first group of Dominion children visit human schools. They seem fascinated by the concept of learning through play instead of combat simulation. Vexstar nodded thoughtfully. The changes in his empire had not been easy. Many of his generals had opposed the new policies. Some had been replaced. Others had been convinced by the practical benefits of cooperation over conquest. There is something else we need to discuss, Vexstar said. 3 more species have requested protection agreements similar to yours. The Zelani traders, the Corvan scientists, and the Helix artists. Nari felt a surge of excitement. When they had first signed their treaty, many had thought it was just an experiment that would fail within months. Instead, it had become a model that other species wanted to follow. What are your thoughts? She asked. I think the galaxy is ready for something new. For 3,000 years, the Dominion has grown through conquest and fear. But fear only works until someone finds something worth fighting for. And what did we find? Hope, Vexstar said simply. You showed me that there are things more valuable than submission. Love, family, dreams for the future, these cannot be taken by force. They must be freely given. Nari thought about the little boy, Choi Minho, who was now 7 years old and attending a special school where human and alien children learned together. She thought about grandfather Han Seok-jin, who had become famous throughout the Dominion for his stories about Earth and humanity. The fleet commanders are asking about expansion into the Outer Rim territories, Nari said, checking her notes. What do you recommend? It still amazed her that the most powerful being in the galaxy asked for her opinion on military matters. But Vexstar had learned that conquest was not the only way to expand an empire. I recommend we send diplomatic missions first. Offer trade agreements and protection pacts. See who might be interested in joining us willingly before we even consider military action, and if they refuse, then we leave them alone? There are plenty of species who would benefit from Dominion protection and technology. We don't need to force anyone anymore. Vexstar was quiet for a moment, staring out at the stars. My advisors still think I have gone soft. They believe that showing mercy makes me weak. Do you believe that? I believe that I am stronger now than I have ever been. Not because I can destroy worlds, but because I can build them. A chime announced that someone was requesting entry. Chancellor Keklost came in, carrying a datapad with the morning intelligence reports. My Emperor, Ambassador, I have news from the core worlds. The Calarian Empire has formally requested a non-aggression pact. They're offering to recognize all Dominion territorial claims in exchange for guaranteed peace. Nari raised her eyebrows. The Calarian Empire had been the Dominion's greatest rival for centuries. The fact that they were asking for peace instead of preparing for war was extraordinary. What changed their minds? She asked. According to our sources, they're more afraid of our new diplomatic approach than they ever were of our military, Keklost replied. They can defend against invasion, but they can't compete with voluntary alliance. Vexstar smiled, showing teeth that no longer seemed threatening to Nari. Accept their offer, and invite them to send an ambassador to observe our next council meeting. After Keklost left, Nari and Vexstar continued their morning routine. They reviewed reports from the colonies, discussed upcoming cultural events, and planned for the expansion of their new alliance system. I want to show you something, Vexstar said finally. He activated a holographic display that showed images. From throughout the Dominion, Nari saw human children playing with alien classmates on a dozen different worlds. She saw mixed crews working together on exploration ships. She saw art galleries where human paintings hung beside Dominion sculptures. She saw families that included members from multiple species. This is what your tears created, Vexstar said quietly. This is the future you made possible. We made possible, Nari corrected. It took courage for you to change everything you had built. It took wisdom for you to show me that change was necessary. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the images of their new reality. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still challenges, still people on both sides who resisted the changes, but it was working. Your Majesty, Ken. I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever miss the old way? The certainty of conquest, the simplicity of ruling through fear? Vextar considered the question carefully. Sometimes I miss the simplicity. Fear is much easier to manage than hope. But I don't miss the loneliness. For 3,000 years, I ruled an empire where no one could be trusted, where everyone was either a threat or a tool. Now I have something I never thought possible. What's that? Friends, Nari smiled. It was true. The Emperor, who had once been the most feared being in the galaxy, now had people who cared about him as more than just a source of power. It had been perhaps the most unexpected consequence of their new alliance. The afternoon schedule includes a meeting with the Education Committee, Nari said, checking her agenda. They want to discuss expanding the mixed-species school program. Excellent. The children adapt to change much faster than the adults. They will build the future we are trying to create. As they prepared for their next meeting, Nari thought about how much had changed since that terrifying day in the throne room. She had cried for her people and somehow saved not just humanity, but an entire empire. The galaxy was still vast and dangerous. There were still wars and conflicts and species that chose aggression over cooperation. But in one small corner of space, something new was growing, something built on tears and hope, and the revolutionary idea that strength could come from love instead of fear. It was, Nari thought, a pretty good start. Outside the window, the stars shone with infinite possibility, and the future stretched ahead like an unwritten story waiting to be told.